So this video is going to be looking at a really important turning point in the late Republic, which was Caesar's consulship in 59 BC. There's going to be two sections of Plutarch, so Cassius Dio, and a couple of Cicero's letters. So as a quick reminder, Caesar had been elected to consul partly due to the efforts of the first triumvirate, which he was a member of, with Pompey and Crassus. Now, once Caesar is in power, he obviously needs to ensure that his colleagues in the first triumvirate's needs are met. That sounded really dodgy, but it wasn't meant to. So, for example, Pompey's eastern settlement needs to be ratified, and Crassus's promise to the tax collectors needs to be also met. So these sources are going to basically talk through the events of Caesar's consulship, and it's seen as a turning point because it was a very controversial consulship, as you could probably expect with someone like Caesar. Now, I will point out that Caesar does do some really silly things and makes things much worse than it needs to be, but not everything is entirely his fault. So we will look at that as we come through. So we do have straight away an example of some use of violence. So this is after Caesar's consulship and the election. So Pompey filled the city with soldiers and held everyone down by force. It's quite a popular quote over the years that people always use in an essay. So we have this kind of use of, it's not violence per se, people are not being murdered, but there is this kind of threat of force, and it is illegal to have armed weapons, swords and things inside the city walls. So the fact that Pompey's using these soldiers like this is illegal. So Consul Publius, that's Caesar's colleague, and Cato were going down to the forum, and he was set upon by the crowd, who broke the fasces of his lictors in pieces. So the fasces, this word here, are basically, it's going to sound really odd, but they're like bundles of rods. They're kind of, I don't know, about a metre long maybe, and they are symbolic of the imperium and the power that consuls have. So every sort of cursus on a position who has imperium has these. I think processors have ones as well. So they're like a symbolic thing. So the fact that these are broken is also very symbolic, that the power of Bibulus as consul has been broken. A lictor is kind of like a secretary, if that kind of makes sense. So they're carried in front of the consul. So obviously we've got this use of violence against a consul. Bibulus, and Cato is a member of the Senate. Remember, these two guys are related through marriage. And then someone emptied a basket of dung over Bibulus's head. So there's a lot of thuggish behaviour being used by Caesar's supporters against Bibulus. Also, very controversially, two of the tribunes who were escorting him were wounded. Now, according to the law, tribunes were protected by the gods, so it's illegal to harm them, whether physically or any other way, to be honest. So the fact that these guys are also wounded shows the kind of level of violence that appears to be growing in the Republic, in terms of political violence. So thus cleared the forum of their opponents. This is talking about the first triumvirate. They proceeded to pass the law providing for the distribution of land. So there's going to be a couple of laws that are passed. There's this land bill, which we'll talk about properly a little bit later, and there's also the settlement one for Pompey's soldiers. So the people were caught by the bait and now became thoroughly tame and subservient. So by use of the reforms, Caesar was obviously then able to gain more power, because the people just kind of, according to Plutarch, could just blindly follow what Caesar wants to do. And then those settlements made by Pompey were now ratified. So that's Pompey's aim met. So he's now happy. At the end of Caesar's consulship, he's received the 2 Gauls and Illyricum for 5 years. Now remember, a consul who goes out to a province is only meant to go out for 1 year. They could be extended on basis of the Senate agreement. So technically, Caesar's not breaking the law, but obviously ensuring he gets the best, basically 3 provinces enable for his military expansion is somewhat illegal, because the provinces were dealt out by lots, like it's like a bag and a dip your hand in and pull out a province. So Caesar somehow just gets the best provinces, root between that way. And for 5 years is also extremely long time. And it was arranged that the consuls the following year should be Piso and Gabinius. We've met Gabinius before when he was a tribune. So they're kind of rigging the elections as well. So that, like I said, Caesar and his sort of colleagues in the first triumvirate are acting pretty illegal here. There is definitely some political violence. We've also got some corruption going on. So these are some good examples of those particular methods. So while all this is going on, and obviously Bibulus has had the dung thrown over his head, Bibulus then shuts himself in his house, and he continues to issue edicts attacking Pompey and Caesar in the most violent terms. So he starts using rhetoric against them. Now, when Bibulus is locked in his house, he claims that he can see lightning. Now, if anybody who is in an important position, such as a consul, claims that they've seen lightning, it is supposed to be an omen from the gods. And basically, if you see lightning, you have to shut down all business in terms of the state. So nothing can sort of trade, the Senate can't meet, People's Assembly can't meet, can't be elections and all that sort of stuff. So in order to frustrate Caesar, basically Bibulus locks himself and kind of opens the windows every day and goes, oh, I see lightning, and shuts them again. So him just doing that is enough to shut the political system down. Now, you might be thinking, but surely everybody can see there has been no lightning. Yeah, this is true, but he's a consul, so you just have to take him at his word. There is definitely a fault in the system. So that's what it's talking about when he says he shuts himself in his house and then kind of issues these kind of statements against Pompey and Caesar. And then Cato's basically kicking up a fuss in the Senate, which is what this is talking about. Fine. Pompey starts to lose interest in politics because obviously he's married his wife and he's very happy. So he spends all his time in the country house and pleasure gardens, paying no attention to what's going on in the forum. Cool. The result was that even Clodius, yes, him, the same Clodius we met not that long ago, who was now tribune of the people, began to despise him. Right, so I'm going to pause here for a second. This section of the source, which I'm going to pre-highlight here, this is talking about the year after Caesar's consulship, which is really frustrating. This is a problem with Plutarch. He tends to jumble dates around a little bit. So these events that have been described here are actually in 58 BC. The stuff above it is in 59 BC, so they are a year apart. So just be aware of this. I probably could have moved this to another section in the source book, but it reads the story onwards. So in 58 BC, so I'm going to type that in so we remember. Okay, this is a change of date. That is when Clodius is elected and becomes tribune. When we talk about his tribuneship in the next video, I will give you more detail about how he becomes tribune, because it's really important. So during Clodius's tribuneship, he exiles Cicero, which we'll talk about in the next video. He also gets Cato sent away into Cyprus, so he gets a military command. Fine. Clodius gets lots of people devoted to him because of things that he was doing to make them happy. Because, I should have highlighted this, I don't know why I didn't. It's highlighted in yellow. Since everything he did in politics had been designed to please them. So Clodius is very much a populares, and obviously he's using his office as tribune to gain his supporters. Clodius now attempted to repeal some of the measures passed to Pompey. We'll talk about those later. And he instituted prosecution against some of Pompey's friends. Again, this is all happening in 58 BC. It does not happen under Caesar's consulship. So just make that really clear in your notes, whether you need to box it or change colour, do something. This is not in Caesar's consulship. It's the year after. Okay. So anyway, we go back to the consulship, and Caesar, Plutarch talking in a different book of the same sort of stuff. So Caesar, armed and supported by the friendship of Pompey and Crassus, pressed on towards consulship. So that's reaffirming to what was said earlier, with Bibulus elected alongside him. So then he proposed various measures for the allotment and redistribution of land. Again, I will talk about that a little bit later. So he encountered stiff opposition from the most respectable elements in the Senate, i.e. the Optimates. He vigorously protested it was against his will they've been driven to put matters before the assembly of the people, but that the Senate's high-handed and stubborn behaviour left him no other course than to devote himself to the people's interest. So again, I will talk through what this is talking about properly, but it's to do with this land bill. But just highlight it for now. And he then went out of the Senate and stood to support the People's Assembly with Crassus on one side and Pompey on the other. And then this is going over what Plutarch said in a previous source, that when he sort of says, oh, will you support my laws? Pompey says if his question of swords, he would produce a sword and a shield. So basically, Plutarch has controlled, copied, and pasted what he said earlier in a different section, which is a bit frustrating. So then we've got some quite sort of nice quotes about Caesar. So Caesar went to gain still firmer hold over Pompey's power and influence. Fine, about the marriage to his daughter. Cato violently protested and claimed it was an intolerable state of affairs to have his government prostituted by marriage alliances. It's just a great quote and kind of summarises Cato's position. Like I said, but previously, the marriage between Caesar's daughter and Pompey is very typical of the period. You have a lot of political marriages, you form alliances this way. So what Cato is protesting is, it's a little unfair, I think, in terms of what the first triumph has done, in terms of the marriage. Everything else that comes after, yes, okay, protest it, but the marriage itself is not an issue. So then we have the whole purpose of Bibulus being elected alongside Caesar was to frustrate Caesar. So Caesar's so far from having any success in his efforts to obstruct Caesar's legislation. That's why he's been put in office. He and Cato with him was often in danger of being killed in the forums. You've got political violence again appearing. So that's when he shuts himself away. So that's the same thing about him being having the dung over his head. It's the same story. Pompey, directly after his marriage, filled the forum with armed men and helped the people pass Caesar's laws. Okay, that's to do with the land distribution and the eastern settlements. We'll come on to that a bit later. I promise we will come on to it in the next source. Cato attempted to speak against the proposals, but Caesar led him off to prison. So again, we have this kind of opposition between the populares and the optimates. It's not political violence here, but you definitely got Caesar acting in a very high-handed way. I'm going to argue a bit later out of frustration, and hopefully when you read the next source, you'll understand why I'm arguing that it's not entirely Caesar's fault. Not that Caesar helps the situation, but it's not entirely his fault. Just saying. What he sort of imagines is when Cato and others are sort of taken to prison, that everybody would kind of side with him. But then Caesar sees that not only were the nobility displeased, but the people too. And remember, Caesar is a populares, so this is going to really trouble him. Out of respect for Cato's good qualities, because he was seen as being a very noble and trustworthy and like a good politician. So as a result of sort of realising that no one was really on Caesar's side in terms of trying to get Cato imprisoned, he then has him released in private. As a result of lots of this kind of thuggish behaviour and sort of high-handedness from Caesar, out of the whole number of senators, only a very few used to attend the meetings presided by Caesar. Kind of understand that. A lot of them just stayed at home because they're like, what's the point? Because Caesar's going to do whatever Caesar wants to do. And then we have this kind of description about Clodius again. So the most disgraceful action of the time was considered to be the election to the tribuneship during Caesar's consulship of Clodius. So remember, like I said previously, elections are held sort of like 6 months to a year ahead. So it's under Caesar's consulship that Clodius is elected to be tribune. And the reason why this all happens, according to Plutarch, and this is probably true, is that Clodius was elected in order that he might dispose of Cicero. And that's because Cicero was being very critical of Caesar's behaviour and Caesar's laws. So it appears to be to try and get rid of Cicero out of the way, that Caesar ensures that Clodius is elected tribune. Caesar did not set out on his campaigns, that's the goal, with the help of Clodius until he'd raised a party against Cicero and driven him out of Italy. Cicero is then exiled during during Clodius's tribuneship, which I will explain all of this again in the next video. Okay, so this is probably going to be the most important source in many ways because it explains what the problem was with this land bill. Okay, so this describes the events surrounding this particular law. So according to Cassius Dio, Caesar wished to gain the favour of the whole multitude. Well, these are populares, it's kind of what they do. He was anxious to see him be advancing the interests also of the optimates to avoid incurring their anger. He'd often told them he proposed no measure which would not also be to their advantage. Okay, so he's trying to keep everybody kind of happy to ensure the law goes through. And so he framed a certain measure concerning the lands which he wished to assign to the whole populace as to not incur the least censure of it. So this law here he is describing, or beginning to describe, I'm going to put this in capitals, it's really important, is the Lex Campania. So basically what the law would do is it would just take land that was kind of public land, as in it was owned by the state, and it would redistribute it to really poor people in the city. So the reason why he does this is here, the swollen population of the city is chiefly responsible for frequent rioting. Make sure you have that frequent rioting because it's a really important quote when we talk about social problems. So essentially, to solve the unemployment and overcrowding situation, if you divide up the land and give everyone a farm, they leave the city. It's as simple as that. So Caesar basically proposes a whole system to ensure that nobody would be really upset about this. So he says he's going to set up a commission, that he himself, as in Caesar, would not be involved in the commission, so it'd be completely independent. It'd be made up of like senators and equestrians and whatever, and they would be the ones who decide how much of the land, how far the land would be divided into like lots, so on and so forth. And it would also ensure that no senators' land would be taken off them. Now, this Lex Campania land had a few estates been built on it illegally, which is obviously not very good, by some senators, hence why there's some senatorial opposition, kind of understandably, even though they were illegal. So, to be fair to Caesar, in this respect, he is trying his damnedest to make sure no one could be upset with him. And Cassius Dio even says, so far as this law went, therefore, no one could find any fault with him. So he's doing everything the right way. Okay? Great. And the land would be distributed to accomplish without any expense on part of the city itself or any loss to the optimates. So they wouldn't lose land, it wouldn't cost too much money, the treasury wouldn't be affected. Like I said, it'd be an independently designed, brilliant, great law, could really solve the unemployment and population problem in Rome. However, our friend Cato, this is why I hate Cato so much, because he's just an idiot. So Marcus Cato, however, even though he had no faults to find with the measure, nevertheless urged them on general principles to abide by the existing system and to take no steps beyond it, and he disapproved of any innovation. So essentially, Cato opposed the law because Caesar put it forward, probably. And according to Cato, it's mentioned sort of in other sources you don't have, it wasn't the right time to do this. So Cato's just opposing it because he wants to. He has no reason to do so. As I said, the law was fine. The way Caesar was going about it was fine. This is Cato just being Cato. And this is why I dislike him so much. Because actually, this event here is going to come back and be a real problem in about 10 years' time in terms of Caesar's actions, which we'll come to when we do it. But like I said, you're welcome to like Cato. I just think he is a sanctimonious idiot who essentially causes a civil war in 10 years' time. But hey, it's fine. So anyway, so understandably, Caesar's very frustrated and was on the point of dragging Cato out of the Senate house and casting him into prison. But when he's about to do this, Cato basically offers himself to be led away, and quite a few people follow him. And it's a really good kind of put down by one of the senators. I prefer to be with Cato in prison rather than here with you. Ouch. So Caesar's not particularly popular in the Senate. So this is why basically the law at this point was going to be blocked. Now, what Caesar does do next at this point isn't an issue. However, it becomes an issue in a second. So what he decides to do is he communicated nothing further to the Senate during his year of office, but brought directly before the people whatever he desired. Now, there is nothing illegal with that. You did not have to go to the Senate to have your laws debated. It was tradition, it was custom. It is not a legal requirement. Just making that super clear, okay? So this kind of point about him going to the People's Assembly, Caesar had absolutely the right to do so, particularly if he felt that the Senate was blocking him for no reason. Okay. So he made a beginning with his colleague and asked him if he'd approved of the provisions of the law, which basically Bibulus kind of goes, no, yes, I hate it. Proceeded to entreat him and persuade the multitude to join him with his request. And Bibulus says, no, you can't have the law, even if the people want it. I'll highlight that. So this is the People's Assembly. And then he starts to lock himself away in his house. Now this is where the problem comes in. So Bibulus, however, would not yield, having gained support of free tribunes, hindered the enactment of the law. So basically, then the tribunes start kind of vetoing the law in the People's Assembly. So when there was no other excuse, this is when he proclaims a sacred period for all the remaining days of the year alike, during which people could not legally even meet in their assembly. So this is when Bibulus starts to see lightning. Obviously, this version of the story is slightly different from Plutarch, where the dung is thrown on his head and that's when he hides. Obviously, Cassius Dio doesn't mention this, but it's the same kind of period. Now, what Caesar does next is the problem. So Caesar paid but slight attention to him and appointed a fixed day for the passage of the law. Now, as I said earlier, that once there is a omen seen, which is what this sacred period is, he sees the lightning, Caesar cannot continue with political business. So the People's Assembly should not be meeting, the Senate should not be meeting, the court shouldn't be doing their job, nothing should be happening. But Caesar ignores this and decides to go to the People's Assembly anyway and has the law passed. This is the illegal bit. This is what Caesar does here is completely the wrong thing to do. Now, I would argue he's doing this out of frustration, and I think kind of justifiably so. However, I can't excuse his behaviour. He should not have done this bit. So up until this point, he's been acting perfectly legally, excluding the political violence and the thuggery stuff. Well, obviously, it's not good. But this action of going to the People's Assembly is massively illegal and is going to be a real problem for Caesar in the future. There's always problems in the future from these people's actions. So that's what happens. So then, hang on, I'm just kind of... So he goes to the People's Assembly, then Bibulus decides to come out and tries to stop this from happening. So when, I'll highlight his names, I should have highlighted it earlier. When he appeared above and attempted to speak in opposition to Caesar, he was thrust down the steps, his fasces were broken to pieces, and the troops and others received blows and wounds. So this is a slightly different version. So Plutarch suggests that a dung was thrown over his head. In this version of the story, he's actually pushed down the stairs. Either way, there is political violence, and it's thuggery, and it's really bad. So Caesar is now acting very bad, very naughty, very, very naughty. But the law is passed, so Lex Campania is then passed. So Bibulus then tries on the next day to annul the act, but it doesn't get anywhere. So he retires to his house and won't be seen for the rest of the year. Fine. And whenever Caesar proposed any innovation, he sent formal notice to him his attendance to a sacred period, by that by the law he'd rightfully take no action during it. So not only does Caesar break the law once, he does it several times during the rest of his consulship, passing all sorts of stuff. So by this means, Caesar attached the plebs to his cause through the land bill, and he won over the knights by releasing them from a third of the taxes for which they had been contracted. So that is what Crassus was after, so now that is also met. He then first ratified all the acts of Pompey. So everybody has got their aims. Everybody got what they want. Has gotten what they want. So everyone at this point is quite happy. So now we're going to look at Cicero's version of the same events. Now, it's not going to go into as much detail as the Plutarch and the Cassius Dio source has done, but it kind of gives you quite a nice insight into how Optimates viewed the situation. Certainly Cicero's supporters did. So it's during Caesar's consulship, and I'm going to point out he's going to be a little bit overdramatic in the situation. So arising from the grave political crisis being Caesar's consulship, he's also pointing out that things are kind of menacing him personally. This is to do with Clodius and the problems that he's going to cause. So I am only pained and deeply pained. Like I said, it's a bit over the top. There's some brilliant quotes in these two letters. So Clodius is threatening the combats I have expected only giving you moderate concern. So Clodius is forming kind of groups of supporters and starting to harass Cicero. Remember their background in terms of the trial. So it's understandable why he's a little bit concerned. And then he starts to have a bit of a rant about how everything's going wrong. And there's this really weird phrase here, le cycle de glande s'est passé. I can't speak French, which I've translated for you. I realised I spelled acorn wrong. Hang on. Oh, I've done that. Sorry. Where is it? There we go. Let me spell that correctly. Supposedly the phrase means the century of the acorn is over. I guess it means basically what this translator has done is he's taken a Latin phrase, put it into French, because there probably wasn't an English equivalent. So the French in English is there. I'm not really sure what it means. I'm really sorry. I think it basically means the time for honour is past and things are going wrong. Maybe, I don't know. Just makes me chuckle. I just thought I'd translate it for you. So we have a really great quote now about the First Triumvirate. The present regime, the First Triumvirate, is the most infamous, disgraceful, and uniformly odious to all sorts of classes and ages of men. Ouch. These popular politicians, the First Triumvirate, have taught even quiet folk to hiss. So people are literally booing and hissing at them in public. Bibulus in Excelsius, so that's when he's locked in his house looking for omens. and he's kind of going, I don't know why, but they sort of praise him for doing it. He's been an idiot. My beloved Pompey, as is going to get a little bit painful, has been the author of his own downfall, because remember the first triumvirate. And everyone's worried about the first triumvirate because they might find it necessary to use terror, is what he's afraid of, that things are going to get even worse. He talks about how at the gladiator shows, the showmaster, so that would be Caesar, and his guests, the other triumvirs, were overwhelmed by hisses. People were literally booing them because people were really unpopular. This is further shown in the fact that when Caesar enters the theatre, applause basically stops when he enters. He's followed by the younger Curio, who's just another politician in the Senate, who received the sort of ovation that Pompey used to get in the days of... Now, I've highlighted this in a different colour. Let me just do that, sorry. In the days before freedom fell. I mean, it's a brilliant quote from Cicero, but it's over the top at the very best. Either way, the first triumvirate are really unhappy about what's happened, and they hate the knights. They're at war of the whole community, which is not true. They're threatening previous laws. It's all really awful, and Cicero is really unhappy with what Caesar and particularly what Pompey are doing as well. We then have some more personal issues. So Clodius is threatening me most hostile, so he's facing some sort of opposition from Clodius and his supporters. Cicero thinks he's going to have his old supporters who supported him during his consulship, basically the Optimates, are going to help him. Pompey signifies that he's going to help him as well. Don't worry about it. Clodius won't do anything. You don't need to worry about a thing. We also get this really interesting quote. We'll probably make you chuckle slightly to make other classes laugh. Which Caesar wants to have me on his staff. Makes me chuckle. So basically, Caesar is about to go off to Gaul to do his thing in Gaul, and he makes a request to Cicero, saying, come not fight, but come be on my sort of my staffing for the campaign. Now, why Caesar does this is a little bit strange, because obviously, according to the other sources, Caesar wants Cicero exiled. He wants him out of Rome to stop him attacking his laws. But yet also Caesar offers him an opportunity to get out of Rome more legally. What does happen is that Cicero declines the offer and decides to stay in Rome, which is going to be like a really stupid decision. But hey ho. So it's just interesting that Caesar, wants to have the sort of alliance or friendship with Cicero more than Cicero probably necessarily realises. Or maybe it's just to shut him up, probably a bit of both. So another great quote, this was actually an exam question on the old specification once, which makes me chuckle. I am certain Rome is finished because of the first triumvirate. So basically, first triumvirate, strangling hold on politics, everything's going wrong, isn't it terrible? So you can probably imagine where this letter's going to go. So the Republic is finished. You've already said that, mate. It looked as though the authoritarian... I can never say this word. Authoritarian regime was agreeable to the masses. So that's the first triumvirate. And initially it seems like they're doing it for the people, but now the people have realised, and it's now becoming universally detested. We know by experience the violent temper and the recklessness of these men who, in their rage against Cato, have brought Rome to ruin. Wow. So the threatening of Cato, put him in prison, the treatment of Bibulus, all the rest of it, it's kind of causing the entire system to completely collapse on itself, and they're becoming really unpopular as a result of it. And it's Cicero's there. He's reflecting definitely some people's views of the state of affairs at this particular point. So he starts talking then a little bit about Pompey, of course he does. So there is our old friend Pompey, unused to disrepute. So his whole career has been really good. He's now physically disfigured and broken in spirit, at his wit's end for what to do. When he says physically disfigured, he'd injured himself in the campaigns in the East. I think he got like a dodgy leg or something, dodgy knee. But so that's what that's referring to. So he's limping. And he's unhappy because no one likes him anymore because he's been the first triumvirate. The honest men, so the Optimates, are his enemies. The rascals themselves are not his friends. So he's really upset. Cicero's really upset with sort of Pompey's situation and how awful things are going to be. Okay. And he says, only Crassus could enjoy basically Pompey's situation. Because remember, they don't like each other. He was a fallen star. one who looked upon as a man who had slid rather than moved from his own violation. Thanks for that, Cicero. So basically, there's more brewing around the Clodius situation, but you don't know what the Clodius situation is yet, but Clodius is beginning to sort of make some moves against Cicero. Things at the moment, Bibulus, he moves on to talk about Bibulus. At the moment, he's in wonderfully high repute. This is a change of attitude between letters. One letter, I don't know why Bibulus is doing it, and now he's amazing because he's, stopping things from happening. Caesar thought he might stir up a public meeting with a speech going into going for Bibulus' house. After a long inflammatory harangue, he could not raise a murmur. So this kind of shows the failure of rhetoric. So rhetoric doesn't always help politicians. And again, we still have Clodius being hostile. Pompey continues to assure me he'll do nothing against me. And I'm getting ready to defend myself. So what do we sort of have as a picture of from Cicero? That the Republic is doomed, the Republic is finished, the first triumvirate of control in politics, everything's terrible. But if you look at kind of what Caesar has done during his consulship, the use of political violence, the use of kind of these groups of people to sort of attack politicians, the fact that he is passing laws illegally, you could understand why an optimate like Cicero would be viewing the situation in quite a negative way.